Nero's Devilbringer is a pillar of his gameplay mechanics, with Snatch enabling constant offense or the straight denial of certain dangerous foes for free, and Buster letting you violently toss them around with various satisfying animations. Since my next essay is proving a lot more difficult than I was hoping for it to be, I thought it might be fun for today if I put together a list ranking the various Buster animations, considering both their practicality in combat, as well as just how cool they look in my personal opinion. Ground, air, and DT busters will generally be grouped up into one, although if I see particular standout aspects of one version, I will try make sure to point them out. First off, on the very bottom, I don't think I'm gonna surprise anyone by putting the DMC5 Angelo busters. After what we've seen Nero capable of doing, having him so leisurely lifting up one knight and then dropping him on his back is borderline insulting. It is an insanely long animation, which not only offers you zero protection for going for it, but also does such a pathetic amount of damage relative to especially the Protoss health that you'd likely have been better off continuing to just swing away with Red Queen. The air version does its damage the moment you impact with the ground, meaning it is something you can definitely go for on occasion, and I do kinda like the little spin he does in DT, but the grounded version is borderline unusable. The Assault Buster in DMC4 is one that I don't exactly love the animation for, although I do like the idea of violently smacking around an enemy on the concrete. But it also leaves you very open, doesn't have a particularly satisfying finish, and most importantly, even when performing it high up in the air, Nero will zip straight down to the floor to do it, making it just incredibly unsafe to use most of the time. It's one of the busters I prefer to avoid at all costs. The Halkaina Buster is something my new script addresses funnily enough, as I consider it to almost be a new take on 3's Wild Stomp, but while its brutality is very much appreciated, and being able to blast multiple bullets through the enemy's skull is badass, it takes a little too long to initiate, and the kick at the end is comparatively a lot less satisfying than how Dante would send them skidding across the floor. Another buster finding itself in a surprisingly low spot for me is the Queen Impusa one. Here I actually love most of the animation. It gets to the action fast and is incredibly visceral and satisfying, with Nero twisting the Red Queen through her fellow royalty's guts. Where it misses is with the painfully long recovery of Nero slowly walking off of her body, taking a lot of excitement out of the attack. Something a couple of the boss busters in this game also share quite heavily. It's not helped by this buster again doing relatively negligible damage on an enemy that has a stupid amount of health. Seeing this animation actually kill the queen is an incredibly rare sight. The Death Scissor grab is quite simple and doesn't do much, since it's basically just another way for you to take out an enemy who's already dead, but it is still quite satisfying to watch how Nero just punches the fucking shit out of them. And it can be useful when you're not entirely sure your next melee attack or gunshot will quite strike the enemy's exposed face. The Chimera Seed Buster is a quick and easy way to get rid of them and prevent other enemies from becoming a nightmare to deal with a quite satisfying animation to boot. There's nothing really wrong with it, it even kind of stands unique as a buster animation designed around being an instant kill, so they could do the thing with him ripping the enemy in half, instead of something it might still be able to survive from. As Chimera Seeds usually come in large groups, it is something you will occasionally end up spamming just to be done with them, which isn't great. But since they can't be launched and attempting to air combo them even after a snatch will just send them flying, a quick air buster is often the safest way to get rid of them. Knowledge from Secret Mission 2 coming in handy, huh? Slam dunking its way into the 17th spot is the basic buster animation that Nero performs against various demons like Scarecrows, Impusas, and Mephistos. It doesn't do anything particularly special, but is quick, always satisfying, and offers a good amount of crowd control to stun other enemies around you. The DT Air version ground bouncing, so you can continue to air combo afterwards or just loop it, is actually super fun. But DMC5 added the buster practically identical to this, just with a cooler animation, which is why this one finds itself maybe a little lower than it should. One buster that a lot of people don't seem to really know about is that while the Hellbats are about to explode, you can actually grab them to throw them at other enemies like a grenade. It's not really necessary, since the blast radius is wide enough it will usually get a lot of enemies anyways, but still a fun way to get rid of them, and it will protect you from the explosion so you don't have to worry about it damaging you compared to blowing them up with a gunshot. The normal Mega Scarecrow grab isn't that useful, and its grounded animation is only alright, but I am genuinely in love with its air variation. The orbital spin around Nero's body and the sort of italic angle the camera takes at the end when you toss them towards the ground in the input direction is incredibly stylish and satisfying to me. I feel like the splash area is probably no bigger than that of other busters that have you slamming an enemy on the ground, but it's still very cool to do with an enemy as large as this. Being able to use the basilisks to your advantage as a makeshift dog bazooka is silly, but a cool way to make use of that enemy's specific design and properties, as well as adding some fun strategy to the Agnus boss fight or other battles that I would be happy to see more of in this series. However, animation-wise, it doesn't feel quite as impactful as some of the other projectile tosses Nero's granted. Among the list of Agnus creations, the Cutlass, while being an utter pain in the ass to fight, have an insanely cool buster of Nero leaping up high and spinning them so fast their blades begin drawing a circle in the air before he dunks them on the ground and repels back from the impact. It not only looks awesome, but its unique superhero fight scene trajectory also makes it stand out from the crowd. Despite me complaining a lot about the busters on the Angelos and the Queen and Pusa earlier, the MC5 actually does fare surprisingly well for itself on its other heavy enemy types, with Nero brutalizing them in some extremely stylish ways. Generally, these don't show any unique utility, and since the heavy enemies of course have to be stunned before you can grab them, you also couldn't whip them out at a moment's notice, but they just look extremely cool. My beloved Judecca, for example, has Nero climbing onto the enemy and violently ripping off the curved blades at the end of its noodle arms, backflipping and tossing them forward like boomerangs before they impale the Judecca and make it fall to the ground. This even puts them into an extremely advantageous state for you to continue your assault, so you can actually loop back into it. But the reason I love it is mostly just due to its creative animation using the enemy's weapon against itself. The air variation actually forces you down to the ground before it starts, same as the Assault Buster, yet despite not dealing constant hits or stun around yourself like some others, Nero's position higher on the enemy as well as the backflip that finishes off the attack does a very good job at keeping you out of danger, and even will lead to some happy accidents of him dodging an incoming swing, so here I don't take offense to it. Gonna make a Judecca video as well someday, by the way. Bit of an oddball, but one buster I didn't even know existed for the longest time is that grabbing an assault out of the air during their annoying dive attack actually triggers a unique animation where Nero suplexes them to the ground. It looks cool, but one reason it's so high is because buster parries are just an awesome mechanic, which are more rare than they should be. They exist on quite a couple of bosses, but for normal enemies, this is the only one I can think of. Remember the Faust cutscene in DMC4, where Nero catches its finger spikes in his hand? You can't buster to parry Faust's attacks in the game, and I would love if this kind of thing became more common. Nero pole dancing around the nobodies in an arm lock is just fun to watch, and the way he goes on to completely flip them over and slam them on the ground like a big ass hammer during the DT Buster variation makes good use of the enemy's anatomy while looking like it hurts a lot. It also gets to the point quickly and allows you to move again afterwards very soon. So it and, spoilers, the Behemoth grab managed to avoid this weird issue of the Queen and Pusa Buster, where the long recovery comes along with an expectation for finality, which never comes. Understandably high up, an enemy which feels like it was practically designed solely for this mechanic. The Gladius Buster is pure utility, with Nero throwing them directly at your target, capable of piercing through multiple foes and dealing a ton of damage. What it's lacking in flair from its admittedly simple animation, it more than makes up by just how useful it can be in combat. Also, the powerful hit stop definitely helps make it feel awesome to perform. Do I like this buster enough to want to spam it against a window for 5 minutes while running for my life? Fuck no, but it definitely deserves its spot at number 9. Similarly to the Nobody arm lock, Nero grabbing one of the Behemoth's tongues and using it to violently spin both of them around their own axis, slamming it flat on its back, looks extremely awesome. The constant damage dealt out during the animation before the finishing hit helps make it feel like it hits incredibly hard, along with it just dealing a ton of damage in general. And while not as advantageous of a position as the Judecca Buster leaves you, it does allow you to safely continue beating on the enemy as it gets back on its legs. The Bianco Angelo Buster is probably one of the big ones that first has the player go, "Oh, this mechanic is legit." Nero swiftly tearing the lance out the enemy's hand and using it to impale it, revving it up before sending them flying across the battlefield and impact with a big explosion. The little hop Nero does backwards as he lets go for me only works in the DT version where he flies along. It takes a bit of the force away it normally would have if he stood his ground, but I still like it anyway. In fact, I don't know which video would be a good idea to put this in, but I am actually not a fan of the big Nero vs Virgil Buster at the end of DMC5. I think its choreography is cool, but the period where Nero and Virgil slowly get back up takes the wind out of it, especially on repeated watches. You can physically hear the awkward pause when someone's waiting for the animation to end. So my idea would be to have the drawn out back and forth for the first time you land the Buster per round, and afterwards replace it with something more akin to this, where Nero just grabs the Yamato and jams it into Virgil's body so hard it sends him skidding across the arena on his feet, to re-establish distance the same way he would by teleporting away after Nero and him both get back up. But anyway, back to my list. The Buster on Blitz not only has to be the most satisfying iteration of a crazy punch flurry the series has to offer, but it also allows you a quite simple way out from taking down one of the game's most annoying enemies by jumping right after the final hit and catching it out of the air with the Air Buster, knocking it back down to the ground so you can infinitely loop it until it's dead. I don't know whether it's exactly great that you're allowed to do that, but with how much of a struggle they can be, it's good knowing that you can resort to that if things get tough. This is one of my absolute favorites. I can't really justify putting it any higher unfortunately, but the Buster on 5's resident GOAT mages, Baphomet and Lusakia, is fucking brutal, and I adore it. The air version is only alright, with Nero repeatedly ramming his knee into the enemy's gut and then bitch slapping it away. But the highlight is Nero grabbing them and beginning to violently bash their face into the concrete before kicking them flying away. I don't know what to really say to explain why I like it, but it's just awesome. Similar vibes to Wild Stomp in Red Queen Combo B, but I like it a lot more than either. Also, the repeated splash damage keeps you surprisingly safe for how long the animation can be when you fully mash it out. The Antenora Buster is the one I was referring to earlier when I said it's basically an updated version of the original Slam Dunk. It functions pretty much identical, with one slam on the ground, 3 in DT, and doing so in the air either will just ground him, or in DT will cause a crazy ground bounce that allows you to continue your air combo, or just loop the grab into itself. But there's just something super cool about the power bomb Nero does, and especially when he does so in the air, having him toss the enemy downward with enough force that he does a whole flip. Feels great to do, and is extremely useful. Up next is the uncontested king of crowd control, the Frost Buster. I am told the animation in DMC5 is exactly the same, but I don't quite buy it. It feels noticeably sped down. Either way, this Buster undoubtedly deserves its spot in the top 3. It is insanely good for stunning enemies all around you, and being able to aim the throw at the end to knock other guys over gives it even more utility. What it maybe lacks in creativity is more than made up by just how powerful of an ability it is to have. I'm not surprised it was the Buster they used to show off during the DMC5 reveal trailer. Lastly, after these two Busters, which were still dope looking, but basically pure and seamless combat utility, we wrap up with two which are just put up top because they are undeniably the coolest looking. In second place is the elaborately choreographed back and forth between Nero and the Fury. Every version of this animation is badass, and also does a great job at making both parties look competent, helping the Fury maintain its status as this game's apex predator, before Nero finally lands his big hit. The guaranteed damage this buster does is also great when you consider how elusive Fury can be to get hits on before it teleports out of your grasp. So even if you can't loop Fury to death using this grab the way you can on Judecca and Blitz, it is still an extremely useful tool at your disposal to kill them. And as for many of these, the Air DT version is the guaranteed favorite, having Nero breaking up their struggle with a gut punch before sending the Fury to the ground with a roar of the Red Queen powerful enough to send himself flipping over. Once again, that shit is just cool. And number 1 is of course the Buster on Alto Angelo. While comparatively maybe a little simple in concept and not doing anything too unique using the enemy's actual anatomy or equipment, like the Nobody or Judecca Buster for example, you just can't beat the insanely cathartic timing of this animation. The 1-2 suplex into the Izuna drop keeps up the energy constantly, with every movement immediately accommodated by a big satisfying hit. It just feels amazing to land, which is definitely helped by this buster also on every difficulty continuing to deal a significant amount of damage on an enemy with a quite chunky health bar, so you don't run into any Proto-Angelo situations where you feel like you just wasted your time for even using it. Especially when comparing this buster to Protos, the difference in both practicality and flair is just unreal. And it becomes very clear how important the timing of the animation is to this equation. The Air DT version in this case is also really cool, but I don't necessarily prefer it over the grounded one the way I do with some of the others. What is cool though is that through some clever use of Nero's Summon Swords and Caliber JC, you can actually chain the ground bounce after the impact of the Izuna drop into yet another buster. But yeah, that wraps up this list for now. Ordering these was surprisingly more complicated than I first thought, but I'd say I find myself relatively in agreement with this list after reading over it a couple times. There are some that could either go up or down a slot or two, but it's hard to compare them with 100% accuracy. What I actually meant to do this week was upload a very special video about Ebony&Ivory, but despite the script for that being done, it turned out a lot longer than I expected. It unfortunately seems like I won't be able to finish that for a little while. I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to animate, but I figured it'd be kinda simple and fun to do. Must have woefully misremembered though, because trying to do so on Krita has been utter hell. Not gonna whine about it too much further, but unless I find a different program that doesn't suck ass, I don't think I'll be able to end on any sort of cool, actually detailed and colored 2D animation the way I was hoping to do after all. Would definitely be a shame because I was really excited to present some of my ideas in a very tangible and creative way instead of just rambling away going, they should do this. But we'll see. And I'll probably save proper thanks for the next video, but holy shit. Almost 8,000 views and jumping from barely 90 subscribers to more than 200 is actually insane. Appreciate y'all a bunch. I hope I find more interesting topics to talk about, like the DT amulet for example.